the Chicago Cubs making a run to another World Series. Don't know if that's going to happen, but they are 6-1 to win the NL Central. 74-88 last season. Win total at BetMGM, 77.5 during the offseason. Certainly made some moves to improve their team. Dansby Swanson, the headliner, 7 years, $177 million. Cody Bellinger, Jameson Taillon, Trey Mancini, Eric Hosmer. The big loss, Wilson Contreras, who signed with the Cards right there in their own division, 5 years, $87.5 million. And the rotation is, it's not terrible. It's not exactly a murderer's row. So when you look at the Cubs, can they go over 77.5? My initial thought is, yeah, they can do it.
Yeah, I think this is a team that can go over their win total, but I'm not sure how high the ceiling is for this Cubs team, because usually if I'm picking a team to win the World Series, I need them to have a very solid rotation with high-end starters. That is not what you see when you look at this rotation, with Marcus Stroman being your ace. Marcus Stroman is good, but I'm not sure if he's good enough to anchor a rotation that's gonna go deep in the postseason. However, if you look at the lineup, they've got a wealth of postseason experience. That's the first thing I noticed when I looked at the players that they have signed in free agency. Dansby Swanson with the Braves, Cody Bellinger, all those years with the Dodgers, Jameson Taillon with the Yankees, Trey Mancini just won a ring with the Astros, and Eric Hosmer many moons ago was a huge piece for the Royals when they won the World Series back in the day. So I think it's a team that can definitely win 78 games, especially in the division in which they're playing in with the Reds and the Pirates. But that's as far as I am willing to bet my money when it comes to Chicago.
Yeah, this feels like a decidedly 500 team that if things kind of break the right way, then maybe they overachieve a little bit. Maybe they make a move at the trade deadline and then they make a run. Look, 6-1 is not bad for this team. Pretty good odds to win the division. I don't necessarily mind that, but man, it's so top heavy with the Cards and Brewers. It's hard to imagine them overcoming those two teams. But the reason why I say 500 is when you look at this team, and they certainly have some talent, but if you look at the lineup, for example, last year they had how many players hit over 285? 0. Not a single player on the roster. Only one player, Patrick Wisdom, their third baseman, hit at least 25 home runs. So not terrible, but certainly not power-packed. They tried to address that during the offseason. And then you look at their rotation, and it's not awful, but again, it's questionable, right? This is the epitome of a 500 baseball team to me.
Yeah, that's as far as I'm willing to bet them, at least. And also, with Cody Bellinger and Dansby Swanson, these are guys that have had some great seasons, but they've also had some really bad ones where they have really struggled to see the ball and they strike out a lot. So if you were talking about adding these pieces and Dansby Swanson is your prized possession coming out of free agency, there's a chance that he's not going to have a great for average season. Dansby Swanson's always going to be a plus defender. He is a good shortstop. But when you need somebody who is just squarely getting on base, like maybe he's not the greatest of additions. And same could be said for Cody Bellinger, who went through a pretty bad slump with the Dodgers. I think it was last year. So maybe it's a Cubs team that struggles to get on base. I don't know. It's a pretty middling team. I don't see them winning the division, and the odds reflect that. They're 6-1. But here's the other thing. I think the wild card in this division is the Brewers, because I'm not sure what to expect because the vibes seem terrible. I don't know if you've seen the stuff with Corbin Burns, how upset he was with his arbitration hearing, but that stuff carries over. And so maybe the Brewers aren't quite as good as they were last year. Pitching is still going to be good, but they're not going to be happy pitchers, as Corbin Burns has kind of shown to us in his appearances with the media. I do think it's the Cardinals. Don't you feel like the Cardinals are a team that it doesn't really matter who's on the roster? They're always going to be competitive. It's such a baseball town.
It is, and they're always going to try their best to field a team that wins. That's their ownership group. That's their tradition. Unlike the Reds, when you've got the owner or the general manager, team president, whoever that moron is, who came out and said, "Oh yeah, we're going to run this like a nonprofit." And what else are you going to do? I mean, there's the only game in town. Just come watch the Reds lose 100 games. So, yeah, they have the setup and the structure in their front office where they're always going to be competitive. And credit to the Cubs. I think they are moving in the right direction here. And certainly when you think about them winning the World Series a few years ago, and that was an incredible story across all of baseball, just baseball is better, I think, when the Cubs are good. Let me bring in Double D here. Double D, give me your take, because our guy, our audio guy, Double D, is based in Chicago. He's not necessarily a Cubs fan. He's going to send me a flow chart of his fandom because I don't know who his teams are. I'm going to memorize this for purposes of the show. But Double D being right there in the Windy City, you're there. You get a feel for things. You hear things that maybe I don't hear out here on the East Coast in my little silo. So what is your thought on the Cubs and how they'll perform this season?
I think their offseason was spectacular, to be quite honest. They got really quality players at, some would say, a discount price. Now, some of those guys are on prove-it contracts, for sure. Absolutely love Dansby Swanson, Bellinger, and our boy Trey Mancini. He will be beloved by the Cubs. I do agree with you both. I think the starting rotation is meh at best. Mm-hmm. They don't have a legitimate ace at all. It's going to be a team that's going to rely not so much on home runs, I believe, but more of a ball and stick team, moving men on bases, maybe some base stealing, possibly. I do see them having the potential of being the number 2 team in this division if there is that fall off from the Brewers because of miscontent over the moolah. And I don't think Wilson Contreras leaving is going to be as big a hit as everybody seems to think. They are very stacked in the minors when it comes to talent at catcher. So that is the one place that they could afford to let. That's probably why they could afford to let Wilson Contreras go.
So when you look at the bottom of the division, Chelsea, I asked you this earlier, and I think it's something that bears repeating, which is when you're looking at a team, look, the roster is the roster, right? And all things can happen during the course of the season, be it you get hot, you get cold, there's injuries and whatnot. But when you look at the bottom of the division, which is so bad, when there's such a discrepancy between the top half, or it's a top-heavy division, and then the bottom teams are so bad, does that give you maybe more confidence in a team like the Cubs to maybe hit their over because they can beat up on those bottom feeders?
Yeah, it definitely goes in like the win column for, pros and cons, or I guess the pros column when picking the Cubs, but also the fact that the Cubs are not afraid to spend money. So if they're even halfway in contention at the halfway point of the season, their ownership will be in buy mode. They will go out and get somebody who can make their roster better. That's the difference between this team and some of the cellar dwellers that, even if they're having a decent season, they're still not in win now mode. The Cubs, even in the years that they have struggled, it's not because they have not spent money. They have had some big free agents that just haven't worked out, or they've had guys at the end of their contracts that just haven't been great. I remember when Jason Hayward was there, he really struggled with hitting at times, despite being on this monster contract. So it's not that the Cubs are not willing to spend money. It's just sometimes these deals do not work out. So it gives me more faith in betting the Cubs win total because I know that they will make the moves necessary, at least to try and win games at the end of the season.
Well, Double D said this, but when you talk about having young talent in the pipeline, and they do, a guy that we mentioned as well is Matt Mervais, hit 309, 36 home runs over 3 levels in the minors, only 24. The problem is the Cubs have Eric Hosmer. They have Trey Mancini, who both play first base as well, and one of those guys could slide into the DH. So that's a guy, Matt Mervais, who may have to wait his turn, and oftentimes that happens in the minors. At the same time, you have to balance between waiting your turn and also bringing up the talent when it's ready to go, when you need that talent.
Right. And I'm not sure what's going on with the Cubs farm system, because here's the thing with the top of the market teams, it is extremely difficult for the prospects to make it there, because instead of waiting for a guy to figure it out in the majors, if he even struggles at all, they're going to go out and get somebody because they want the big names that fill the seats. So I do like the Cubs this year, though, just not to win the World Series.